we've been through this. I'm just going to combine factorising with solving. So what's the difference between factorising and solving?
Solving your finding is a factorising and simplifying.
Was that, sorry, solving your finding?
Yeah, sorry.
Very good. Solving you're finding out what x equals. So often we will get a solution like this. I'm just going to write this question out here. And it will say solve for x. Who has seen something like that before? Good. If you haven't, that's fine. I'd be confused if I were you too, probably. Tell me what's the operation going on here, Jake? What's the operation between these two terms?
Plus.
In here, this one is it. What's that operation? Is there anything there?
No.
So we don't write anything there, what's the implication? Like if I write 4x, what's the implication?
Times.
Yeah, it's a multiplication thing, correct? So I've got this thing times this thing, correct? Tell me, Jake, what's the solution? What's the only way I can times two numbers together and to make them equal 0? Give me two numbers, multiply them together and it has to be 0.
0 times 0.
0 times 0? What about 0 times 7?
Yeah.
7 times 3?
Yeah.
Trick
Oh,
question.
wait, no.
Trick question. What am I trying to get at here, Jake? What's the only way that this will work? I've got two numbers multiplied together. They have to equal 0. What's the only way that will happen? When one of those numbers is. So I need to go through the scenario where either this is 0 or this is 0, correct? Tell me when that happens. Does it happen once? Does this thing equal 0 once? No? How many times should it equal 0? Every time. So when x is 1, does this thing equal 0? 1 plus 2 is? 1 plus 4 is? And 1 plus 3, sorry? 3 times 4 is? That's not 0. When will this thing equal 0?
When x is 0.
0 plus 2 is? 0 plus 3 is? 2 times 3 is? I disagree. It does equal 0 at some point, but that doesn't happen at 6, and it does at 0, and it doesn't happen at 1. When does it happen? What x values will allow this thing to equal 0? So, -2 and -3. Who disagrees? I wouldn't if I were you. Explain how it works, so.
Well, if you've got a negative number and you add a positive number, the same value you get.
Very good. So -2 plus 2 is? -2 plus 3 is? 1. But it doesn't really matter what it is, correct? Because this thing equals 0, the whole thing's going to equal 0. Cool? Same thing works for -3. Now I could formalise that. I could write here an equation with a little squiggly. Although it's not very mathematically correct, I'll do it anyway. 0 equals x plus 2. 0 equals x plus 3. Are we happy with that? What am I doing? This is scenario 1, and this is scenario 2, correct? What should I do in this scenario? What do I want to do? Get x by itself. So how do I get x by itself?
-2.
That's what Sophie said, isn't it? Anyone know what we call that? It's got a special name. NFL. Null factor law. What does null stand for? 0. So what's the null factor law saying? Anything times 0 is 0. So if we're using our null factor, what we're really saying is the only way we can get this to equal 0 is to have this thing equal 0 and to have this thing equal 0. Cool? There are 2 times when that equals 0. What I want you to do now, can someone tell me off the top of their head what the original function was? You can reverse, you can expand it if you can't remember. X squared plus 5x plus
6.
I want you to graph that for me. Get onto Desmos and I want you to write in that graphical. So in Desmos, graph that and tell me what you see. Zoom in. Tell me what you notice about this graph. It's not linear, very good. It's parabola from those of us in Year 9. I want you to zoom right in on something. Zoom right in on some key features of that graph.
Goes through the x-axis twice.
Goes through the x-axis twice, very interesting. Goes through the x-axis twice.
It goes through -2.
Goes through -2n. Now, I want you to write down in your books, if you've seen that, I want you, if you've seen something, write down why that happens. Explain to me why you think that happens. Why does that make sense? Why does that make sense?
Because x squared, so it goes through twice.
Yeah. Not all x squared functions go through twice, but I should have graphed this correct. And some, well, I've just rubbed it out, that was a good function. Some people said they noticed something about the x-intercepts. Now, if you haven't found that yet, I want you to look very carefully at the x-intercepts. That's exactly what I want you to see here. The x-intercepts occur at the exact numbers. I'm not a big believer in coincidence. They happen here and here. Tell me why. Well, let's just... I want you to pull me up when I do something that is wrong. Has everyone had a chance to write down why they think that occurs? I'll give you the first step. Does this equal this? Are they the same thing?
Yeah.
What's the difference? I've just... Starts with F. I've just factorised it, correct? That's the first step, so y equals that. In 30 seconds I'll give you the next step, but if you can find it on your own, it'll be far more beneficial.
Where did you get details of the function?
We factorise this, remember we did the brackets?
That's not correct.
X plus, So tell me about every x-intercept in the history of x-intercepts. Where do they occur? When y equals 0, correct? So what I'm now going to do is replace 0 with y. Or y with 0, sorry. And then tell me, when does that equal 0?
When x equals
When this equals 0, or sweet. So when I ask you to solve a quadratic, what am I really asking you to do? Find the x-intercepts, correct? Now tell me, will every quadratic have a solution? Will I be able to solve every quadratic? Change that quadratic, the one that I've just given you, change one number in there so I can't solve it. Change one number on your quadratic to make it unsolvable, so there is no solution.
Oh, you can always have a solution.
Not always.
With the equation.
No.
Okay, so
You won't, because if you have, you know how we looked at the quadratic equations, so
That's what I was saying.
negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac. If 4ac is bigger than b squared, what happens? Can you square it a negative? No solution, not possible.
Oh, that's true.
Cool. All the ones we give you
Yeah.
will have a solution. Well, not all the ones, but most, 99% of the ones that we give you have a solution.